Hey there, Kimberly here with Knit for Brains. Have you ever wondered what size yarn goes with what pattern and make sure that you've got enough? And what happens if you use the wrong size yarn with the wrong size hook? Well, stay tuned because we're going to be talking about weights of yarn. And does size really matter? So stay tuned with Kimberly with Knit for Brains. Hey there, it's Kimberly again with Knit for Brains. And you know, I get this question a lot, and this was something that I had to learn the hard way and work on through my crochet experience, and that is, what size yarn weight do you want to use per project, and does it matter, and what does that little number mean on the tag? So we're going to talk about that today. Now, if you've never looked at a yarn label, everything you need to know about the yarn is right here on the label. It'll tell you the weight of the yarn, what size crochet hooks to use if you're crocheting, and what size needles to use if you are using needles. And it also tells you little things like, you know, is this washable? If so, what temperature do you want to put it into? Should you dry this yarn? Should you use an iron? And then, of course, it's going to tell you, the name and the lot colors and things like that. So I wanted to talk about that today because I have made my share of mistakes with this, and if I can help you avoid making this mistake, then I have done my job. So the first thing let's talk about is lace weight yarn. Now, so this is a lamb's wool and cashmere yarn. Very, very fine. This would be great to use for a sweater or a garment. This is not something that I would recommend that you'd want to use for a blanket or a toy or something like this. This would be a really nice, fine, as in delicate, high quality sweater. This is 25% lamb's wool and 5% cashmere. Now, because it's so tiny, you're going to get a lot of weight in this. This is actually 600 meters. So there's a lot of yarn in here. Okay, but you can see it's almost that thin of like embroidery thread. So this would be considered a weight of 0. This you would do lace work. Sometimes it's also known as like thread or cobweb or even light fingerling. You may not see a lot of this around. This might be a little bit hard to find because this is for very, very, very fine work. And a crochet hook like this would not work for this. You would need something that is very specific to this weight. Really, really tiny, like lace work crochet hooks. Now, the next number is number 1. Now, number 1 is considered to be superfine or fingerling weight. And it's also known as sock weight, but there's actually a little bit of a difference between the two. So this, for instance, is a number 1. Now, this is also known as crochet thread. So if you've ever seen crocheted purses or dresses or garments of clothing that are 100% cotton that are using, like a crochet thread, they're probably using something like this. So this is a number 1. It's super fine, and it tells you right here whether you can wash it, iron it, and what kind of hook size you're going to want to use. Again, you want to use a really small crochet hook to really get those good tight stitches. I don't do a lot with this one as well because it's a thread. It's a cotton. It doesn't have a lot of give to it. It's 100% cotton. So you wouldn't want to use this on something that was going to have a stretch. Like, for instance, you couldn't use this on a sock, and I'll show you why in a second. This would be good, again, for dresses and garments and different things like that. Not as good for a blanket. This, for instance, now this is a sock weight yarn. Now, this is superwash wool, 75%, 25% nylon. This is an extra large, so I actually would say this is going to be more of probably a fine. If you compare the two between this and this, you'll notice, let me see if I can, you'll notice that it's a lot thicker than my crochet thread. Can you see the difference there? This one, however, has nylon in it. So if you're going to be making socks or a hat, you're going to want to have something that's going to have a little bit of a give to it, a little bit of pull, so that you can stretch it and it's going to go back into shape. If you were to stretch this, it wouldn't go back into shape and you'd have socks on a rooster. So if you're going with like a sock yarn, you want to make sure that you're using something that's going to have some nylon. You can have wool in it, you can have cotton in it, you can have different kinds of natural fibers, but you're going to have some amount of elasticity in it so that it's going to be able to hold its shape and come right back. And this again, a lot of times you're going to find a sock weight yarn in a weight of 1, but this one in particular is probably going to be a weight of 2, although it doesn't say it. So here's the deal. The United States is very specific about their labels and what is on them. And not that Europe isn't, but in other countries, it's a little bit different. Now, this yarn is actually from Hobby, and they don't put the weights on all of their yarns. So this one, for instance, does not have a weight on it, but I'm looking at it, and I know in comparison to my other ones in here that this has got to be at least a... Next one up is my weight of 2. So 2, a weight of 2 is known as a fine yarn. Now this is a weight of 2. Okay, now this is 100% cotton. So it would be a good yarn as far as weight goes for socks, but it would not be a good yarn to use for socks because there's no give. There's no nylon, there's no stretchy, any kind of elastic in it. This is 100% cotton. Now you might have noticed that I recently did a sweater, a crocheted sweater, using this yarn. And this would be great for that because it's 100% cotton, it's pretty soft, so it's gonna have a little bit of a drape to it. But because it's cotton, it's gonna wash up really well, it's gonna hold up really well, and it's also pre-shrunk. So I know that if I wash it, it's not gonna shrink up. So this is going to be your weight of 2. And once again, you can see the number right here. So you always want to make sure that you can see the numbers, and it tells you the hook size and the needle size depending on what your craft is going to be. And then again, it'll tell you right there on the label if you're going to be able to put it in the washer, at what temperature, if you can iron it, things like that. Certain yarns like 100% wool, you don't want to iron, you don't want to dry because it's going to make it shrink up really bad. Now, that being said, if you want to do something like felting, then you do want to make sure that you use 100% wool because the wool fibers will kind of marry and meld into each other, and then it forms that kind of a felt fabric that you're looking for. And if you have anything else in there like an acrylic or maybe even a cotton, it's not going to felt. No matter how many times you wash it, trust me friends, I have done that before. No matter how many times you wash it, dry it, block it, whatever, you're going to see the stitches, it's not going to felt. So you want to make sure that if you're felting, no matter what weight yarn you use, because it comes in all different weights, you want to make sure that you make sure it's 100% wool. All right. Now, this is also a weight of, this is a weight of 3. So it's a little bit thicker. I'm going to show you the difference between the two that I have here. So this is a weight of 3. This one I just pulled up is a weight of 2. So this one here is a weight of 2. This is so the yellow is the 2, the pink is the 3. And if you look closely, you can see that the 3 is slightly bigger. Now, if you come across a pattern where you're like, ooh, it calls for a 3, but I only have a 2, is that going to be a problem? Probably not quite as different as some of the other options you could go with, okay? But again, what's really important, you want to make sure that the fabric, that the material that the yarn is made out of is the same. So for instance, if it calls for 100% cotton, it's going to be more important that you use 100% cotton than something like an acrylic or a wool or something like that. And try to get as close as you can to the actual weight of the yarn. This, my friends, is the other one that we were looking at. Now this, as you can see, it's going to be at least a 2. I think it's probably a 2 as opposed to this. So this first one is a number 1 and these last 2 are number 2s. Okay. So this, we have a 1, we have a 2, and then this is probably going to be a 2 as well, again with some elasticity in it. This particular yarn is made out of hemp. It's 100% hemp. Now hemp, if you're not aware, is a plant-based yarn. It is made from the same plant as the cannabis plant. But a lot of people do like to use this for garments, fabrics. So no, you can't smoke this. I mean, you could, but that would be silly. And it's not going to do anything to you except probably make you sick. But it is a little bit stiff. So It will break down. In other words, it will get softer, and the fibers in the yarn will get softer the more that you wash it and the more that you wear it. But it is kind of coarse. So this would be really good if you're going to make like macrame or a purse or maybe some household items. Not sure that I would want this up against my skin. Again, it will start to soften, and a lot of people do love hemp clothing, so it's kind of a personal preference. But if you were going to make something for a baby, I wouldn't use this. I would go back to something really soft like this one, which is 100% organic yarn. And it says, oh, baby organics on here. So it's very, very soft. It's almost like a mersized cotton. And mersized, if you ever see mersized cotton, it means that it's just a little bit softer and a little shinier and a little slicker. So it's really good for clothing and garments. Like not all cottons are made the same, just like not all wools are made the same. It can be very confusing. So this is hemp, and this is a number 3, and this would be good for garments of clothing, purses. This would be good for like purses, maybe some tops, things like that, knowing that it's going to get softer after time. But I wouldn't use this for like baby clothing or baby blankets or anything like that. Now, your number, something also to remember about weight of 3 yarn. This is called a light yarn. It's also called a DK or double knit yarn. So that's what DK stands for, double knit. It's also considered a light worsted weight yarn. So this is very popular weight in yarn. You'll see this quite a bit in your mainstream lines, your Michaels and Joann's and your different big box stores and your mass production yarn lines. You're going to be carrying a lot of. So with a weight of 3, this is also called a lightweight. It's also called a DK knit weight. DK stands for double knit, and it's also called a worsted weight or a light worsted weight. So this is a very popular weight size. Probably 3s and 4s are the most popular weight size that you're going to find. You're going to find this in your big box stores, your Joann's, your Michaels, Amazon, if that's where you buy it. Not as much probably in your LYS, your local yarn stores, because they're going to carry a little bit more of the high end and more of the luxury yarns like your cashmere and lamb's wool, things like that. Okay, but this is a very popular weight of yarn. So if you're looking just to start out with something and you really don't know what you're doing, starting with a weight of 3 or 4 would be a great way to go. Next on my list is a weight of 4. Now the 4s, but before I move away from that, let me show you another weight of 3. This is a weight of 3, and this is called kobu. So this is cotton and bamboo mixed together. So I love the way that Lion Brand, and this isn't a Lion Brand video, but I do love the way that they mix up their yarn. So they'll have like kobu, which is cotton and bamboo. And then they have like their nubu and their trubu. And then they have like a touch of silk or a touch of yak. So what they do is they take a high-end fiber and then they mix it with a more of affordable fiber so you can dabble in the good stuff, but at a better price point. Now, as an aside, I found this on Michael's on clearance, and it was $2.50 for a skein, which is pretty good. So this is a mixture of cotton and bamboo. So it's 52% cotton and 49% rayon from bamboo. So if you see rayon is actually made from bamboo. Bamboo is a very sustainable plant. In other words, it grows very, very, very fast. So you're not worrying about deforestation. It's a very eco-friendly plant in that it just grows really, really fast. And you see it in a lot of gardens and things like that. So this is made out of bamboo. And then, of course, with the cotton is going to keep it nice and soft as well. Now, one thing to note, and this might be an obvious, but the higher up in weight you go, the thicker the yarn, the less you get in quantity. So for instance, when I started out with this one at 600 meters, this now we're looking at 232 yards, so like 250 meters, so half the amount. The size looks about the same in skeins, but this one gives you almost twice as much because it's so much thinner. Now this is also a weight of 3, just like this one is here, but you can see the coarseness, you can see the natural fibers of the hemp, of the cannabis plant coming through in here. And this one here just looks a little bit softer, a little bit more polished because it's got the cotton, but also then the bamboo going on through it. Now, A weight of 4 is probably going to be your most popular mainstay yarn. So if you walk into a Joann's or Michael's and you're like, hey, I just want to learn how to start doing this, what do I pick up? I'm going to recommend that you pick up either a 3 or a 4, but to be honest with you, probably it's going to be like a 4. And if you're just starting out, acrylic is probably going to be your best friend. Acrylic is going to be the most forgiving, the most affordable, the most allergy-free. A lot of people have allergens to wool, sometimes cotton, and silks, and those, mohairs and things are going to be really expensive. So this is a super, super, super basic yarn that you can get at Michael's, Joann's, Amazon, whatever. Okay. It's 100% acrylic, but right here you see the number 4. So 4 represents what we call medium weight. It's also called worsted weight. It's also called Aran weight. It's also called sometimes fisherman weight or Afghan weight, but most often you're going to hear medium weight, worsted, or Aran, which can be confusing. Call it one thing, people. But again, people from all over the world crochet and knit. So they have all these different names as they come through. Fishermen, for instance, because back in the day, fishermen back in like England and Scotland and over in Europe, they would go fishing and they actually would repair their nets, right? If they were fishing and there'd be a hole in the net, but they also made their fisherman sweaters. They were the ones that started crochet and knitting. Mostly, for the most part, were men, right? Okay, so this is your basic. If you're just like, what do I start with? This would be a good one to start with. It's 100% acrylic, so it's going to wash up really well. If you want to do some shrinking or felting, this is not going to be your yarn. But if you want to make something and then make sure that you can wash it and it's not going to shrink and it's not going to really fall apart, this would be a really good yarn. If you're going to make anything for a baby, such as a blanket or maybe a toy, something that's going to be more durable, more stain resistant, that kind of stuff, then acrylic is probably going to be your friend. Okay, so this here, again, you're going to be using some of your bigger hooks for this. This is probably as big as my hook is going to get for this guy right here. And this ball, for instance, has 141.7 grams, approximately 228 yards. So this is approximately the same amount as this guy. This has 200, what did I just say? Because I have old time memory. This has 228 yards approximately, and this has 232 yards approximately. So you see how this can be confusing? This is why I make these mistakes. Don't make these mistakes. So different yarn, different sizes. This is a 3, this is a 4. Same amount of yarn, but you're going to have to use a lot more if you're going to be doing something like this than this. Okay. The next one up, now we're going to get into some of like the specialty stuff. But before I touch on that, okay, so let's touch on this one. Now this one is called Touch of Silk. Now this is from Lion Brand. So remember how I said that Lion Brand does a really good job of kind of combining some fibers with some more cost-effective methods like 100% cotton. This one is called Touch of Silk. So this is a label. This is a number 4. It's got some cute little nubbings going on in this. It's going to have a little bit of the softness, but yet it's going to have the silk, but it's going to have the natural fibers of the cotton. So this actually would be a good thing to wear as a sweater. It's got 60% polyester, 20% cotton, and 20% silk. So that is why this can be so cost effective. It's a 60% polyester. The 20% cotton and silk are just to make it feel good and really nice and soft. But the 60% polyester is what doesn't hit your pocketbook so hard. This here is 219 yards. Okay. Now this is also a weight of 4. So you got 219 yards right here. You got 219 yards here, 228 yards here. So just about the same, right? And the same weight. These are both the same weight. Again, let's look at the different fibers. So even though they look different, if you look at the fiber and you measure it this way, you can see that they are about the same. This is a weight of 4. So this would be a really good, probably a cost-effective way if you wanted to make like a sweater for yourself or maybe a cowl, something that was going to go on, is that you could also make a blanket with this. This would be a nice, good, cost-effective, this would be a nice cost-effective way to make something really nice, has a little bit of a touch of softness to it. Okay, so now we've talked about the most popular sizes, which are going to be your weight of 3s and your weight of 4s. Now we're going to start getting into a little bit more of the bulky sizes. So let's start with the number 5. So a 5 is considered to be more of like a chunky and getting more into some of your craft and some of your novelty yarns. So I've got some 5s here. Now this one isn't labeled, which it means it comes from, I think it comes from Turkey. So sometimes, as I said before, sometimes yarns from Europe don't come with a label. But you can see that this is definitely thicker than a 4. So this is my 4. And then this one here is going to be at least going to be my 5. And the way you can kind of put it up against other yarns if you're not really sure. But this is definitely not a 4. This is really going to be more of a 5. This is a chunky with wool. So what that tells me is it is going to be wool with something else. Now in this particular instance, this is 80% acrylic and 20% wool. This would be good if you wanted to make maybe a sweater, something that people might have an allergy for. You wanted the durability of an acrylic. You wanted it to be able to wash up well, and you didn't want it to shrink, but you also wanted a little bit of that warmth, which you're going to get in the wools. This is going to be a number 5. So this is going to be considered a bulky, or you might see it listed as a chunky, potentially something listed as a craft yarn, or maybe even a rug yarn. So now we're starting in the 5s, but check this out. This is also a 5. Now this is a lot thicker. So it's not an exact science when you get down to it. Sometimes these yarns tend to be a little bit fuzzy. See how this is fuzzy? But if you pull on it and give it a little bit of tautness, it's going to condense down a little bit. And then it's going to look pretty close to the width of this one. So see, it looks kind of fuzzy, but if you pull down on it, they're pretty much the same. Okay. Now this is a, I haven't actually worked with this one before, but I was interested in it. It's called Eco Cozy. Now this has 145 yards in it, but this is made out of, I believe it's like a recycled, yeah, it's 100% recycled polyester. Which I'm like, dude, that's like a recycled plastic, which I'm all about recycled plastic, but I don't know if I want to be wearing it, but it's supposed to be nice and soft. They say you can use it for things like cowls, scarves, things like that. I'm not sure that I really would, but the point is this is a 5. This could be good for something like a house item. More of a craft yarn is what I purchased this for. This one I'd be more apt to put this in a scarf or sweater or something like that that was going to wear against my skin. I'm not so sure about this one. It actually makes me feel like I can't breathe. Like, not really sinuses, but it's just, I don't like it. But if you find it for a craft project or something like that. But again, this is a 5. Now, check this out. This is also a 5. Which is what I'm saying, it just can be a little bit kind of loosey-goosey. So here is where I wanted to talk to you about this other fun little fact about yarns. When we look at the weight of a yarn, there's something that we also call a halo. Now, so when you think about a halo, you think about something that an angel wears, right? That kind of fuzzy, halo thing. Maybe it's a little bit of like a fuzz around it, not quite clear and in focus, okay? In this instance, so this yarn here is actually considered a 5. I'm trying to find the end of it. When you look at it closely, and if you give it a pull, the yarn itself, the actual strand, is not that thick. But what we're looking at is the fuzz. This is the halo, the fuzzy part around the edges, and the fact that you got that little blue sequin going through it. So that makes it a 5, which also would be good for a craft. Now, the way I look at it, would I want to take a 5 like this and make a whole sweater out of it? Probably not. So I'm not as apt to want to use a weight of a 5 for something I'm going to wear. In other words, am I going to have lots of skeins? Because it's going to take a whole bunch of skeins of something like this to actually make a sweater, as opposed to something like this in a 4. This would make more sense to me. So for something like a 5, I might want to use this to make a cowl or an accent to a sweater of some kind. Maybe I would do it for the cuffs or the collar or, stripes going through it or something like that. So that would come into more of the craft and the accent side of it. But it's interesting to note that this one, this one here, and this one here, which seems a lot thicker, and this one here are all in the same category. To me, there's a big difference there. So this is a weight of 5, bulky. The next one I want to show you is even bigger. This is called super bulky, or a roving weight. Oh, the last one I wanted to show you in the 5 category is this guy. Now, it mentioned in the 5 that it could be considered a craft or a rug. Now, this looks to me like a rug. I could actually see making almost a rug or some kind of a household item out of this. This is a weight of a 5. This is 100% of an acrylic. This is a mystery yarn. It's 98% acrylic and it's 2% other. I don't know what the other is. That's a little scary, but I do like this yarn. I haven't actually used this before. It's a homespun. It's by Lion brand. I typically buy this on clearance. I have a bunch of this. I have no idea what I would do with it. I'm thinking probably a blanket or something like that. But this again is a weight of 5. So when you compare this with this one, right, you're seeing the width there. Then you bring this one in here as well, and you can also see some thickness. So it's kind of about the same, and then you're bringing this one in as well. So you definitely can see it's a thicker, a bulkier yarn. You see how we've gone from this to this, and you can understand now having the right yarn for the right pattern makes all the difference in the world. Next, I'm going to show you a 6. Now, a 6 is considered a super bulky or even a roving yarn. So here's where it gets kind of fun. So I'm pulling out my 6s. So this is again a Lion's brand, and I just happen to have a lot of Lion brand because I really like their products. As you know, very good and sustainable. I mean, affordable and good for fun projects. This is called their homespun yarn. Now, this is a weight of a 6. It's 100% acrylic. So if you want to start with something and just try your luck at, crocheting or knitting, it's always good to start with a nice acrylic. Okay, again, it's going to wash up really well. There might be a little bit of pilling going on with this, but you're not going to have to worry about like the allergies with the wools and possibly sometimes the cotton and things like that. This is 100%, it's a weight of a 6. Now this only has 81 yards. So remember what I told you, the thicker the yarn, the less you're going to get per skein. This is 81 yards as opposed to this one, which as I told you before is 250 yards. So like less than half. This is actually 3 times, this is a third of what this is. Okay, and it's all about the weight. 100% acrylic. And like I said, 81. Now, I wouldn't use this for a sweater because I'd have to have way too many skeins and it would just be really big and really bulky. The upside is that this stuff works up really, really fast. Perhaps I would do maybe a scarf or a hat. Now, this is interesting, and we're going to talk about this here in a second. When it talks about how many skeins it's going to take to make something, one of the things you don't always see, but you sometimes see on a label is right here. So this tells me that it takes 1 skein to make a hat. It would take 4 skeins to make a scarf, but it would take 10 of these to make a sweater. This is when we're dealing with our super bulky. Now, that being said, I actually did make a really cute sweater. This is also a weight of a 6. Made a really cute sweater with this, and you can see that this might be like a little bit thicker, these two between the two of them, and they're both the same weight. My pink looks a lot thicker than my gray, right? But they're both a weight of 6. This again is 100% acrylic. In this little skein right here, it comes with 65 yards. So 65 yards as opposed to 81 yards. Big difference, but also a weight of a 6, both acrylics. This is also a weight of a 6. Go figure. Remember I talked about the halo a second ago? This is sort of like it. But again, you're really getting into more of that craft or novelty yarn. I would never make a whole sweater with this, but I could make a really cute rug with this. I could use this as fringe for maybe a tassel, or if I was going to make like towels or home goods, this would be a really cute border. I have used this as a border or an edging for blankets, and this would be really adorable for that, or even like a fringe for a jacket. But the takeaway, my friends, is that this is also a 6. See that? Shows you a 6 for this guy. So this and this and this, all of these are 6s. And the last one, this is a weight of a 7. Now 7 is going to be your jumbo or your roving yarn, and anything past this, we're just really going into craft yarns. This is a 7. Now mind you, this is interesting too, because if you look at this closely, you can see how some areas are really thick and some areas are really thin. So it's not a 7 across the board, but they're going to look at the thickest part of the yarn, and that's what they're going to get their weight in. Obviously down here, this could be even like a 4, or maybe even probably a 4. But this part up here is so thick that we're just going by this weight here. This is going to be your really novelty yarn. This is 63 yards. It is 52% polyester, 38% acrylic, and then there's a little bit of 10% wool. Would I make a sweater with this? I probably would not. I mean, you could. You would just have a lot of skeins. But you could make a cowl or a scarf, or it might be a little bit difficult to make a hat, but you can make some really cute accessory items with this. This is a weight of a 7. And this guy, last but not least, this is some crazy stuff. I would need a lot of it to make a sweater. This is going to be in the 7 or even an 8 or a 9 range. This is just real big. And again, we're not looking at the actual yarn thread here. We're talking about the whole width here, as in considering that's kind of a halo. So I hope this makes sense. We've gone from a 1 all the way up to our 7. So we've got our 1 here, which is like basically thread, all the way up to our 7s, and then pretty much everything in between. So you could understand why it is so important to know what you're working with and what weight you want to be working with. Can you swap out, right? So if it says I'm calling for a weight of 3 in a cotton or a weight of a 3 in a wool, is that going to make a difference? It is going to make a difference. As you saw, there's a difference in just the weights. It is going to make a difference in your end result. So if you're looking at something like a nice warm sweater that's going to have some structure, that's going to have, that's going to be nice and warm and retain the heat, then you're probably going to want to do it with wool. You're not going to want to do it with a sweater. This one in particular is going to have a little bit of a drape. Cotton is going to have more of a drape to it than the wool, which is going to be a little bit stiffer than the bamboo, which is also going to have, you know, a lot more of a drape and kind of a silkiness to it. So not only does it matter what the weight is, but it's also going to matter what kind of material that you're using and you're going with. Okay, do you want to have wool, which can be sometimes very scratchy? Some people can have allergies. Do you want that against your skin, or do you want more of a mixture with like an acrylic and a wool built in? So it really just depends on what you're doing. Ideally, if a pattern calls for a specific weight, a specific yarn, or even specific fibers, whether it's cotton or silk or wool or acrylic, it's probably, as a general rule, best to stick with what it's calling for. Even if you get a different yarn, as in a different manufacturer, a different brand, if it calls for silk or it calls for cotton, or it calls for a certain weight, it's really best, if you can, to stick with that particular fiber and to get the best results, to get the results that are going to be as close to the end product that you're hoping to get. So again, this is Kimberly with Knit for Brains talking to you about what's the deal? Is it worth its weight? Does this really matter? Yeah, it actually really does matter. And take it from someone who's made those mistakes before. I've had things turn out totally wonky, all different sizes. And you're like, oh, what happened? Had to do with the weight. Okay, so Kimberly with Knit for Brains, I hope this made some sense to you. Comment below if it did, or if you have any additional questions. or if you've made those kind of mistakes, or if, just whatever, just comment below, because I'd love to hear it and I'll respond. Thanks so much for watching. I'll be back soon with a lot more videos, some tutorials, some unboxings, and always a lot of fun.